Hey Men's community, thanks so much for joining us for another episode on YouTube brought to you by the Merrimack Institute for New Teacher Support at Merrimack College. Today we are joined by Dr. Lindsay Lyons. Lindsay Lyons is an educational consultant who works with teachers and school leaders to inspire educational innovation, create curricula grounded in youth activism, and build capacity for shared leadership and racial and gender justice. Lindsay taught in New York City for 7 years, holds a PhD in leadership and change, and is the founder of the educational blog Time for Teachership, which I'll also hyperlink in the description box below. Also, Lindsay will be hosting our first fall workshop for the Mints starting, and this will be on Tuesday, September 29th, from 3:30 to 4:30. So you should have gotten an email from that. If not, the RSVP and information is on our website, www.merrimack.edu/Mints. So we're so happy to have you here, and we can't wait for your workshop, and we also can't wait to see what you have planned for us today.
Thank you, Amanda. If it's okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen, and then we can go ahead with some slides and the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course. All right, so today I would love to talk about promoting student engagement and teaching for justice. I think the goal for all of us is 100% student engagement. So all students are just excited for class. They are running to class, whether that's in person or in the physical space, perhaps just running to a laptop somewhere. But that excitement and engagement is what all teachers and educators dream about. Now, the struggle at this moment is pretty real, right? We have a difficulty in access for devices and Wi-Fi and broadband, and the emotional and relational support that our students and our families and our teachers need in this moment is probably unprecedented. It's really a difficult time to be juggling all of these different things. At the same time, we're looking for curricula and pedagogy that is relevant and engaging, but also flexible and able to assess student learning in a lot of varied ways, whether a student is able to demonstrate learning in a multiple choice test or can't come to a live discussion for the class. We need to make sure that we're flexible in how we assess students and assessing students in a multitude of ways. And that can be really overwhelming when we're already juggling all of this other stuff. So the piece that I really want to talk about today is in response to a question that I've received a lot from different educators and principals and school leaders, which is it really possible to do both, addressing kind of COVID and the situation we've been put in with distance and hybrid learning, as well as the calls for making racial justice a priority? My answer to this is absolutely, we can and we need to do both. I think there is a misconception out there that we can only focus on one thing at a time. But if we do that, if we really just focus on one thing at a time, what we're actually doing is saying that racial justice is not at the core of what we do. It's not at the core of our response to COVID. And we're actually perpetuating racism and white supremacy, because what we're saying is, racial justice will just take a back seat to the pandemic for now. Therefore, kind of indicating to our students and our families that our priority is really white students, or students who are not in the global majority, right? Or students who are Black, Brown, or Indigenous. And so I absolutely think if we want to be just in our school systems, we can do both, and we have to do both. So now the question is really, how do we do that, right? What does that actually look like to do both and to do both well? Well, of course, we need a supportive environment so that all of our students and our families really feel a sense of belonging in the school. I think part of this is also, how do we measure the things that are important to us? So if we're just looking at success of a school as the test scores or the graduation rates, just completing school and getting through those years of schooling, we're really saying that we just value kind of the academic day of the test performance of students, or we're valuing students not getting expelled over the course of 4 years. If we expand our idea of what schooling is and what the purpose is and how we measure success, we might be measuring things like self-reporting data from students and families who can tell us, do I actually feel a sense of belonging at school? Do I feel like racism is a part of my schooling experience? And if so, how? Another piece of that too, with a supportive environment, is thinking about, instead of parent communication, which is often a term that we use in education, thinking one more broadly, instead of parents, to extend it to families, because there are a lot of different family structures. but also as opposed to communication, which is often one way, like school to home, we can think of it as a partnership. And so really working in partnership in concert with students and families to have that shared responsibility for student learning. And also just this idea of equity, right? Flexibility is more important than ever in this moment, and really making sure that we're being equitable, which means that we're not going to communicate in the same ways or to the same extent with all families. We're going to communicate and partner and work with and provide opportunities for students and families that need that support more than others. And that's okay. That's really at the core of racial justice work, is the difference between equity and equality. When we think about our pedagogy, we really want to think about kind of this idea of high expectations, high support. And so we want to make sure that we're not underestimating what students can do. And a lot of times how we design schools, how we maybe track students, it puts a lower kind of expectation level on students who might be in classes like what I taught. I taught primarily special education and students who were new to the English language. And a lot of times those students are seen as having, a lower capability for some reason, just because of how our system is constructed. So while those students may need a lot of support, we also need to keep those expectations high. One of the things that's come out this year in the fall is research on remediation, which we're being told does not work. And so while students are coming in with this huge gap of learning this year more than any other year we've seen, the remediation process of going back and saying, okay, I have a group of fifth graders, I'm going to just go back to mid-year fourth grade and I'm just going to teach that. That actually doesn't really work, because then you just kind of extend that learning gap, and that perpetuates. And so what we want to do instead is to offer that grade level content, but scaffold up to it. And so if we're reading a fifth grade level book, that's going to be difficult maybe for students who aren't reading a grade level, we offer, the audiobook component or something, or we show the video of the book as well. And we get students to really comprehend all the intricacies of that novel. For example, if you're teaching a literacy class, in a way that is scaffolded, but still grade level. Another piece is culturally responsive social emotional learning. And so I think a lot of teachers this year have said social emotional support is really critical, and we want to make sure that we do that well. And I love the quote from Dina Simmons, who says that basically if you do SEL without examining the oppressive systems, it's really, quote, white supremacy with a hug. End quote. And so I think that's a really powerful piece, right? If we say we're doing social emotional learning, but it's not in a way that's also interrogating, our expectations of students. If we're saying, I'm going to teach you how to control yourself because I believe that you as a student should be quiet and compliant, as opposed to speaking out against these systems, then it really is white supremacy with a hug. And that Dina Simmons quote is correct. And so we want to just make sure we're being culturally responsive in our practice. Another thing that we can do to kind of check ourselves is constant self-assessment. And so I've shared through this bit.ly link, you can access it. I think Amanda's going to drop this also in the comments. Is that right, Amanda?
Well, yep, definitely.
Awesome, thank you. And so this is the Equitable Practices Self-Assessment. So this is something that I borrowed that was already in existence and just kind of turned it into a Google form. And so individual educators can make a copy of that Google form and share it with their colleagues. Leaders can use it to kind of evaluate teachers' own self-assessment of their practice, not as an evaluation tool, but as a self-evaluation of how am I doing in this practice? And maybe where could I focus on being a little bit more equitable with my practices? So the other big thing, I think, is curriculum. And so let's dig into exactly what that means when we talk about designing curriculum for this moment. So I think it's really important, and I have recently read the Gholdy Muhammad's latest book, Cultivating Genius, which is, I think, one of the best books on education and curriculum design that has ever been written. I'm actually centering that in the workshop that we're going to be doing for MINTS at the end of September. So this will be great if you're interested in learning more to attend that. But this idea of really embodying what she calls criticality and identity and intellect, as well as skills in what we're teaching and in the learning that we're designing. So it's important that we teach about injustice and we teach activism as something that students are developing as a skill. So we have an incredible opportunity to build on our society's increased attention in this moment towards systemic racism in the United States. And that energy exists in society. We just want to bring it into our classes this fall. And so the last 4 years of my teaching career, I actually made the decision to teach all of the literacy standards in my class that my class really had to cover through Common Core, through an intersectional feminist content lens. And so we did a lot of activism projects. We did a lot of, discussion of racial and gender injustice. And students were really, asked to become civically engaged, to be aware of what's happening in the world and what they could do. And it was really, I think the importance here is it was really centered and central to the curriculum. And it wasn't an add-on. It wasn't just like, we finished this project or we finished this lesson and now let's think about, what could we hypothetically do? No, this is the project we're actually doing. We're actually engaging in civic activism. And I'm going to ask you as students, because I believe in you, I see your agency, I see your brilliance, and your, as Gholdy Muhammad says, I want to cultivate your genius. And this idea, I think, is really powerful. We want students to graduate and have a real civic engagement skill set that they can embody as they move through the world. And so again, I think, as this quote says right at the end, doing this well really requires an intentional choice to make this a priority. We have to choose to prioritize this work because it's not built into a lot of curriculum that exists on places like, Teachers Pay Teachers or the textbooks that we often are given to teach. And so this does require a little bit of legwork on our ends, but it really results in a lot of student engagement. The other thing is to co-construct unit ideas with students. And so there is a wide continuum of what this could possibly look like. I know teachers initially are like, what are you talking about, Lindsay? This is nuts. I don't know how you expect me to do this. So there is a growing field of research that I am so excited to be a proud member of, but this is the body of student voice research. And so one of the pieces in the student voice research is this collaborative partnership with students and this co-construction of not just their learning environment and how they learn, but also what they're learning about. And so this is just a quote from a blog post that I've written about this, but really sharing with my students my kind of thoughts about what I might be capable of teaching really well and have deep knowledge on, and also having them share to me, what are those current events that are interesting to them? What are the things that they are passionate about, that they are seeing affect their everyday communities, their family members, their friends, and what do they want to talk about? And being able to have flexible space for that is really critical. Now, at one point I said, students, you can make your own unit. Like, I went that far to say for an entire semester, I'm going to support you with unit design tips. We're going to bring in mentors who are experts in whatever field you want to learn, and we're going to do that. And that definitely was one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum might be something like I'm doing with my Merrimack class, Gender, Race, and Society this year, where I have developed from the beginning of the class, before the class started, kind of a list of resources to read or to think about for the year. So students are going to watch, these texts and this film or listen to this podcast this week. And then on Wednesdays, I've made them kind of case study days. And so these are really open. So if you see my syllabus now, it's like just as case study for the rest of the year on Wednesdays, because each Wednesday I really think about what students have been commenting on in their asynchronous discussions on Google Classroom, and think about what's happening in the world, and then bring that specific piece into the curriculum. And if I know when I design at the outset that there's that flexibility embedded, it's a lot less scary to say, okay, we're going to have a discussion about a case study. I know generally how I want to run this discussion. And now I have the flexibility to do that and, ask students what they want and bring that into the curriculum. Oops, there we go. One of the things I think as well is important is creating projects for an authentic audience. So when we think about a summative assessment, sometimes we will, default to 5-paragraph essay or something like this. And that can be great, depending on how it's framed. I've definitely had some really successful projects where it resulted in a 5-paragraph essay and the essays were amazing. But the problem with the 5-paragraph essay is that typically only the teacher sees it. And so how do we create projects that are for an authentic purpose? How do we create things that really we can invite family members or other colleagues and teachers in, or administrators in, to see what are the students doing? So examples of some of the projects that my students have created, they have read books in literature circles and then taken the social justice and racial justice themes of those books and actually put them into their own unique individual poems, and then combine those poems with other students in the class in their group and performs from memory. And these are students who are brand new to the English language too. It is fabulous what they're able to accomplish when we just kind of give them these tools. They performed for a live audience of about 100 people, their poetry performances. And we got to invite like other students from other classes and other teachers and, family if they wanted to come. And so that was a really cool example. We've also done social justice expos. Students have created products that people can actually buy. So t-shirts, raising awareness of, for example, the mistreatment of pregnant women who are incarcerated. We've submitted documentaries to a national film competition. And so students have the opportunity to, actually make money off of their projects if they won the film competition. There's like scholarship money involved. I know the Codeswitch podcast always has a yearly annual event for student podcasts that they can, actually win, which is also really exciting. I think there's that competitive element that students are really excited to engage with. But knowing, that their project is going to be useful and seen by an audience beyond just me was always a really good motivator for students who typically might not be super engaged in a project. This just gives them an opportunity to really share their voice and share the message that they want to share. Now, the other piece of this is when we think about grading, we often grade maybe on a rubric where we're speaking to the skills and the standards from, whatever the state or the federal government says that we need to teach. And one of the things that I like to do is teach on a mastery-based kind of scale. So we're constantly working towards growth as opposed to just a static number. We're not, an A student or a B student or a D student. We are currently in this particular skill in this moment of mastery. And we know where we're going next. We know where we came from. And we constantly, as teachers, can give students that revision and that concrete feedback that tells them, here's the next step. I think a big piece for flexibility in this time of COVID is thinking about, being flexible also with our grading policies. So enabling students to be able to revise and resubmit, as opposed to saying, I'm going to grade this first draft. That's your grade. That's stuck with you for the rest of the year. So I think that's just one piece when I think about grading. But I also think about what we actually measure. So beyond those skills, what we measure tells students what we value. So if we're just measuring academic skills and we're telling them that we like, social justice and we're interested in their ability to be critical thinkers, but that's not one of our standards, well, then that's kind of a discrepancy between what we say we value, what we actually are valuing, because we're measuring it and we're grading it. So Teaching Tolerance has amazing social justice standards, and they're grouped by grade band. So if you're working with, kindergarten first graders, there's a grade band standard for you to just pick up and use. There's also examples for each grade band of like what it looks like in practice. So activities you could do with students or sample context that you could discuss with them to really make that meaningful in your class. And then maybe, Amanda, we could drop that link. I could share that link with you in the chat as well.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Another thing that I think is really difficult, and just in terms of getting started, is, how do I find inspiration for amazing units like this, right? Like, where do I even get these ideas? So there are amazing groups of educators online. I have one called the Time for Teachership Facebook group, which is linked to the blog that Amanda is dropping into the chat. But I think when we think about and finding inspiration, it's not just talking to other educators. It could also be kind of doing our own learning. So I often get my best unit ideas when I'm listening to podcasts while I'm on a run or something, a book that I read, maybe I'm watching the news and I'm seeing, a media clip that I really want to center conversation around. And I also think starting with an interesting question is a great place to start. And so thinking about a really debatable question that students are really excited to answer. And I think debatable is an important word here because we want it to provoke a student response. We also don't want the question to be like, there's really only one right answer or one just answer, like racially just or socially just. We want to make sure that we're asking questions that students can answer from a variety of ways. Typically, you want the answer to be something that they can't answer in 1 minute, right? It requires a lot of different examples and things to bring in. And that question will really frame the rest of your unit. I love the book, as I said, Cultivating Genius by Dr. Gholdy Muhammad. I think this is a wonderful book when you start building out how do I make sure I embed things like criticality, like identity work for students into those curricular units. So I definitely recommend reading that. my favorite sources for my own inspiration, I listed out here. So, the blog Rethinking Schools is amazing at centering justice in all of their work. If you're interested in project-based learning, the YouTube channel for PBL Works is great. They have a whole playlist of project videos where you can see students actually doing projects in action. And these podcasts, I think, have really pushed my thinking around things that I could talk about, critique, teach differently in my class. Another great idea is to reach out to a community activist organization. So there's a lot of community organizations that are already doing work, working with educators, coming in either as guest speakers, or they can also help you design curriculum for your units. And now just to close, I just want to say, right, we do not have to choose. Student engagement this year is absolutely critical. This is, part of the success of this year is going to be how students engage and to what degree. But I just want to reiterate that addressing COVID and racial justice are just not mutually exclusive. We have to do both. And when we do both, we can really promote student engagement and build youth leadership capacity, which I believe is the most exciting kind of vision of school that we could have.
Yes. Oh, that's so awesome. Thank you so much. It's so funny when we go back to these side-by-side screens, I usually say a few things and then I say, do you have any final thoughts? But recently the presenters have had a wonderful final slide that, encompasses all the final thoughts. So thank you. I was just writing some notes down, like your new research sounds amazing. I was a former women's and gender studies major myself, and that class sounds amazing, like the Monday, Wednesday setup. And I loved all of the inspiration ideas with the books. So I'll also write down all of those book names and the podcast links. I started to listen to podcasts more recently. I never thought I would be one to listen to podcasts in the car, but here I am. But yeah, just all of that. Thank you so much for sharing all of these tips and tricks with us. And we can't wait for the workshop. I have the title, which is based off of that book, I'm assuming, with the Cultivating Genius. So her workshop will be titled How to Design New Units to Cultivate the Genius of All Students. And we're so excited for that, Tuesday, September 29th. And I think that's all we have for today. Thank you so much again for joining us. And we'll see you in a week or 2 weeks. It's coming up. So we're looking forward to it. Anyway, Mince, we're here for you. And thank you for listening and watching. Talk to you later. Bye.